Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes, and with me as always in the world of practice and ethics is my good friend and fellow traveller, Ken Kelly. How are you, Ken?
I am very well, exceptionally well today, Rory. And as I come to you today, you may hear the pitter-patter of little raindrops on the roof of my studio. We're being bombarded, as we make this recording, by the first named storm, winter storm, to hit the UK. And it's making a noise. So if you hear, that's what it is.
Yes, raindrops are literally falling on your head, aren't they, Ken?
Oh, I like it. I'm going to burst into song any minute. This is episode 92 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Today, you can expect us to kick off with a discussion about developing your chosen modality. It's going to be an interesting topic, that one. And then going into Practice Matters, which is a specialist section that Rory is going to lead, going to be speaking about free speech in the therapy room, Rory. Tell me more.
Yes, well, I'm going to be arguing strongly a point that was driven home to me when I was a student, that therapists are not agents of social control. In other words, we're not there to police clients' opinions or thoughts. We're there to hear what they have to say. We may not agree with what they have to say, but I think to paraphrase Evelyn Beatrice Hall, we should defend the right for them to say what they want, and we can explore that with them. It's all about exploring frames of references, and we shouldn't audit people's frames of references because we don't agree with what they say.
Interesting topic. Looking forward to that one. And we're going to be ending episode 92 speaking about working with diverse client groups. And we've touched on this a number of times before, but it is an interesting topic, hopefully a different angle that we'll be looking at this from today. But starting off, developing your modality, Rory.
Yes, well, it come up in our Facebook group, this, and if you don't know what our Facebook group is, if you go into Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, you'll find two pages. The first is our business page, and if you like the podcast, give us a 5-star review, because that's really, really useful for us and helps our webpage with all those wonderful resources get higher rankings so people can find that valuable information. But the other is a closed group. If you knock on the door, we'll let you into it. And there's nearly 20,000. I think at the time this will go out, there'll be 20,000 people in there, all interested in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. People ask questions. And one of the questions came up, and it was, how long do you have to practice your therapy for, the one you've been taught, before you learn another one? And I think that's an interesting question. And do you want to know my take on it, Ken?
I do. Go ahead.
Well, I think that there's a phrase that comes up a lot in counselling and psychotherapy, and it's called apprentice, journeyman, and master craft. And I apologise for the male pronoun in that, but the BACP actually talk about this. And I think that when you're doing your studies, you're in an apprenticeship. You're learning your craft. You're learning how to use the tools, the therapy, the modality, the skills, the ethics are all part of that. And I think that part of becoming a competent practitioner is sticking with the knitting for some time after you've qualified. And it's no coincidence that ethical bodies talk about 450 hours of practice before you go for accreditation. And they usually want that in the modality you're practicing in. So I'm not a great believer of qualifying and then going to learn another modality. I think there's something about getting comfortable in the modality you're practicing, really understanding it, really seeing how that works with the clients. And then when you're comfortable with that and you've got mastery of it, then maybe develop another idea or go and find another modality and add that. But I'm not a big fan of just graduating and then collecting a certificate in another modality, because unless you know how to use that, then the modality you've been taught, then I think that's the difficult one. I'll give you an example, Ken. What would happen if you had someone who qualified as an electrician and then decided to do a bricklaying course? Would you employ that person?
Yeah. Well, they wouldn't be seen as a specialist, would they? They'd be seen as a jack of all trades. And I know if I was going to a doctor and I had a very specific knee problem, I would feel most confident going to a knee specialist rather than a general working on all body parts practitioner. Although I'm sure they could do the same kind of job, but I would, because of the nature of training, but I would feel more comfortable with someone who knows what they're doing.
Yeah. And what's wrong with celebrating the modality you've been trained in and really understanding it? I practiced for, I think, a good 10 years in person-centered before I kind of adapted it slightly to involve psychological education, because the world of trauma really needs that kind of approach. And we have more clients who are coming to practice and presenting with trauma. But I really do believe that there's something about really understanding the modality, gaining mastery of it before you go on to develop another set of skills. Nothing wrong with it, but give it time, give the modality time to settle.
100%. I'm with you there, Rory. And I think that this is something that comes up a lot during training. We've certainly heard it when we were teaching, Rory, where you may be learning a base modality. Let's just take an example of person-centered. And you may be wondering, but is that really directive enough? Am I really making a difference if I'm just facilitating the client and letting them find their own way? And I can remember from my own studies, there was a time when I went into my supervisor and suggested, should I not be bringing in different interventions into what I'm practicing? Should I not bring in a little bit of CBT, a little bit of psychological education? And when we discussed that, it was my non-belief in the modality that I was working. And the only reason that I had that, I guess it's not really non-belief, but I hadn't fully bought in. I wasn't trusting the process, Rory. And it took a while. It took me a while in practice to actually see the changes in the clients before I was able to go, I get it now. And you really need to be out there practicing your chosen modality at depth to see that work. And of course, when you come across clients that don't fit your modality, being able to refer those clients onto someone else rather than trying to implement that modality from maybe a book you may have read on the topic.
Yes. I think Ken's alluding to someone I met many years ago who said that they'd studied Jungian therapy. And I pointed out that it was Jungian, and they were on a person-centered course. And to be a Jungian psychoanalyst, you needed to study for about 5 years and be in therapy twice a week. You cannot learn another therapy from a book. You have to really examine and live the meta model before you can be efficient in it. You wouldn't want to be flown on your holidays by a pilot who's learned to fly from a book, would you?
Oh, no, right there, no.
The big book of aeronautics.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely not. But it is interesting. I mean, the one thing that I've noticed, looking at the different modalities and the different theories that underpin those modalities, there's a lot of similarities in the modalities when you kind of get down to it. Maybe sometimes different words are used, and there are, of course, some stark differences, but there are so many similarities as well.
I'd agree, Ken. Human suffering usually comes from very defined sources. The root of human suffering isn't very wide. It usually comes from childhood or experiences. Basically,
no,
that's it.
You're 100% right. You're 100% right. And I think when we're thinking about modality, we're also thinking about the client's journey. And there are certain modalities that, if used together, can be confusing to the client. So if you started potentially with a purely person-centered way of working, where the client is in charge of where they're going, you are merely going along with them, and then came across a certain presentation where you thought, well, let's just jump into the old CBT here and bring in a little bit of homework and a little bit of direction and directiveness. What you need to be doing is this, and this. It can be very confusing for the client when modalities are mixed without the proper expertise. And I'm putting that in big bold, without the proper expertise, because of course, within integrative therapies, we are taking a little from each modality, but we're doing it in service of the client at the client's pace.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, integrative is a particular way of working. It's a modality in itself. You'll join on a number of diverse elements to form that. And the best example I can give is soup. If you think of a lovely vegetable soup, it takes care to mix those ingredients together. If it has carrots, it might have onions, it might have tomatoes, potatoes, and that needs to be mixed together in a way that is tasty and appealing. If you just serve someone up, raw carrots, potatoes, a bit of water, and said, there we go, that's vegetable soup. Well, that's the basis of it, but it would be very appealing and people wouldn't really want to eat it. And the same thing goes, I think, with therapy. If you're just a mishmash, I think it can be really dangerous and clients may be very confused. 1 minute it's non-directive, next minute there's homework coming out, next minute someone's talking about life scripts and ego states. And the client's got worries and they're having to balance all this. It can be, I think, very confusing and not very helpful.
I agree. I love this topic. I think it's a very interesting topic. I think many students along their journey maybe do question whether the modality is enough. I've seen it asked so many times on the Facebook page as well. And I guess if there's anything here, it's trust. Trust in the process. Get out there and work your modality to the best of your ability, and study further in your modality. Study deeper. I mean, if you finish and you graduate, that's not the end of your studies. Continue with your continuing professional development and look for areas that underpin your modality, where you can strengthen elements of your modality. And I know for myself, it was very surprising to eventually become very attached, I guess, to my modality. Maybe over so, Rory. I was holding on for dear life.
You don't say. Yeah. I think it forms a personal. It's important to the practitioner. I know a lot of practitioners in the CBT world, in the TA world, in the humanistic world, are very attached to the meta model. It's a very personal relationship they have with it, and I think that when that happens, as long as they can differentiate between what the model can help with and what it may not be able to help with, there's no problem there. So, yeah, and I think the other thing to remember is the modality is only part of the story of therapy. Ethics, skills, they're universal. They fit with any therapy. And it's a question we get asked in the Counselling Study Resource, our paid resource where people could come in and draw down resources. People will say, does it fit integrative? Does it fit transactional analysis? Well, the answer is yes, because within those modalities are all the other ingredients, such as ethics, such as skills, such as general good practice. So the modality is only a part of the whole cake of counselling. I'm using a lot of cooking.
We've got soup, we've got cake. All we need now is how many you have to break some eggs to make an omelette, Rory, and then we're on to a winner. Bring another one in. Yeah, that is one. I mean, I work on the support side of Counselling Study Resource. I get the emails and the questions, and that question, Rory, comes up so often. My modality is X. Will the Counselling Study Resource fit my study journey? And the truth is, the Counselling Study Resource is about 20% theory and 80% practice and skills, ethics, diversity, but just under the actual modality section, in the theory section of Counselling Study Resource, we cover attachment theory, cognitive behavioral, EDMR, existential, Gestalt, integrative approach, person-centered, psychoanalysis, and motivational interviewing, as well as another few there. So there you have the definitive list.
There we go. Yeah, so a plea really at the end of this segment, please, get skilled, get the craft, become that journeyman and master craftsperson, because that really is in the benefit of the client. And it also then speaks about when you're thinking about the modality of therapy, before you go into a training course, do some research. It may be that person-centered or TA doesn't fit for you.
100%.
So I think you can only practice effectively if you believe in the therapy.
Yeah, very, very much so. And that's why Counselling study is so many years long. I mean, if you do level 3, you should come out of level 3 having done comparison and contrast of various modalities, and that's for there so that you can kind of get a feel for the different modalities, so you can look at where you want to spend the rest of your studies, choose the college or the learning institution that will support you through that. One last tip from myself, specifically if you are a student of counselling and psychotherapy, you are getting out there, the first steps in your modality is choose your supervisor wisely. Choose a supervisor who shares the same modality so they can support you and you're not getting any kind of contamination that might leak in. Look around, speak to different supervisors, and make sure that you're being supervised in the modality that you are practicing.
Absolutely. It's just so important to make sure that you're doing the right thing in the service of the client.
Love it. And speaking about in service of the client, we're going into practice matters. Practice matters, again, is just, it's where it's where the rubber hits the road. We're full of all the little sayings today, Rory. It's about how we can be in service of the client in the practice room. And you're speaking today about that free speech, Rory.
Yes, it's something that's being debated a lot in wider society. And my belief is, and I've always believed this, is that when clients come to therapy, we should hear all of them. And we shouldn't try to audit any parts. We're going to meet a wide cross-section of people who have very different opinions from us, some that may be uncomfortable to hear. And I'm going to be speaking about how we work with that, not audit the client, but also make sure that we are not collaborating with very extreme ideas or actions. So I'm going to be talking about that. And of course, there is, as you like to say, Ken, a super duper handout.
Oh, looking forward to that. Into Practice Matters after this very short message.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
The quote, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," is often misattributed to the French philosopher and writer Voltaire. It's actually attributed to the writer Evelyn Beatrice Hall, Voltaire's biographer, and appears in the book The Friends of Voltaire, published under Hall's pseudonym S.G. Tallentire in 1906. The quote is often used to highlight that free speech allows and encourages differing opinions and points of view. In a democratic society, this right is protected under law. So what happens if you have a client whose opinions are diametrically opposed to yours? Do you try and debate with them or discount what they say? Of course not. Counsellors are not agents of social control. We are not there to police our clients' thinking or try and change their opinions. So what happens if a client directly asks you if you agree with them? How may you respond to such a question? One way is to respond with congruence and unconditional positive regard. As long as the client is not breaking the exceptions to confidentiality, my response usually reflects that of even Beatrice Hall. I may say, we may have different opinions, however, this session is about exploring yours. If pressed, I may respond by saying, I don't necessarily agree with you, however, I know your views are important to you. Meeting a client with diametrically opposing views is something Carl Rogers reflected on in an interview filmed around 1985. He was discussing his experiences of visiting South Africa during the rule of apartheid, a policy and system of segregation and discrimination on grounds of race. He was counselling an officer in the South African Army, an organisation which at the time subjugated the majority black population, an ideology which ran contrary to Rogers' own beliefs. These are his observations of that meeting in his own words. I'm very fortunate, and the client is very fortunate, if I can feel I can really accept you fully, just as you are, but sometimes that's very difficult. I held an interview with a young man in South Africa. I didn't know anything about him. It turned out he was an officer in the South African Army. Now, for me, that meant I stretched my empathic abilities to the very limit to try to be with him, to try to understand him, and try to be caring toward him. I didn't feel I did too well, and yet I've learnt since that the interview really changed the course of his life. So I feel that if I can be genuinely understanding and try to listen, I don't know the words, but to be meaning to try to understand the person that's hidden within each one of us is helpful. If I really care about this person in an unconditional way, that's helpful. If I can really be myself in the relationship, not a professional expert, not a quote psychologist, not a psychotherapist, just me in that relationship, that's helpful. All those things are possible, and when they come together, that creates a very powerful climate for change, for their growth, for the drying out of the potential of the client. Roger's response reminds me of the demands sometimes asked of a person-centred therapist, and indeed maybe all therapists, no matter what modality they practice. It also reminds me that these demands are sometimes difficult to achieve.
Thank you, as always, Rory. Always important topics. I love Practice Matters because you discuss the stuff that matters. That's why it's probably called Practice Matters. And of course, you can get Rory's super duper handout. How do you get that? Well, you can get it for free. You just go to counsellingtutor.com. That's our mother website. If you haven't visited that and you only listen to our podcast, you are really missing out. It's counsellingtutor.com. In the top menu bar, there is a little tab that says podcast. Click on top podcast and go down to episode 92. That's today's episode. All of the show notes that we have discussed today will be there. That's kind of précis down for you. Any links that we may have mentioned or thought of after the episode will be added to that page. And of course, you can get Rory's super duper handout for free right from within that page. Of course, if you are already a member of the Counselling Study Resource, which is our paid for part of Counselling Tutor, well, that handout has already been added to your handouts vault, so you can just log in and that is there for you. It was a really interesting topic, Rory, and it just reminded me of unconditional positive regard, and we don't have to share the same views as another human to regard them with positivity, I guess.
Absolutely, and it may be that people with very extreme views, as I alluded to, by allowing them to explore that, you might find the root of it. And sometimes I've seen people's perceptions change in the therapy room when they've explored the root of their ideas, and you may have come away thinking, well, maybe it's not exactly as I thought, but that's for them to work out.
Yeah, it just shows how different we all are, which brings us beautifully onto our final topic for today, which is working with diverse client groups.
Yes, and again, it's another topic that came up in the Facebook page, and the question that was asked was, could someone who was white, Christian and heterosexual work with someone who was different faith or different sexuality or had a different skin tone? And I'm going to be talking, talk about that, because I think the answer is that yes, you can. Counselling is about the common ground. And, we're all humans. There's a great quote, isn't there, from Shakespeare, tittle me, do I not laugh? Prick me, do I not bleed? Poison me, do I not die? It's the Merchants of Venice, Ken.
Oh.
And
it's not on my shelf behind me, Rory.
In my house we speak of little else, and it's the Merchants of Venice, and I think there's some truth in that. But I think that when you work with culturally different clients, you need cultural awareness. You need an idea of how the culture they come from is affected by wider society. And I think that's something that's taught within counselling courses. I know that when we taught together, Ken, there would be a module on diversity. We do lessons on diversity and get people to think about how their own history may impact on a client. And I shared with my students, and I'll share with the audience, that I'm 60 years old now, and when I was a young man, or 12 or 13, there's still parts of the British Empire. I had a British Empire map on my wall, Ken. Can you believe that? And it said the sun never sets on the British Empire.
Wow.
And Yeah, and it was all the places that we owned. And, that was the British Empire that we didn't actually own them. We'd kind of colonized them and subjugated them and robbed their resources.
Yes.
But yes, at the time it was considered, this is the British Empire. And of course we've moved away from that. And also it wasn't unusual if you're on a football pitch to hear the chants of 2 World Wars and 1 World Cup when we're talking about the 1966 defeat of the Britain England winning the World Cup. People would go singing that, and of course these things are not acceptable anymore. We don't do that. We're a society that understands that everybody's different, and we embrace diversity. So part of that is awareness, but I think that awareness is about your own story. To be honest, I think without looking at your own story, as I've just done, I think people can fall into a few traps. To be honest.
Definitely. It's a topic I mentioned right at the head of this podcast that comes up again and again. It's an evergreen, and it will continue to come up. And yes, it is a very different world today than it was. I bumped into a friend that I last saw when I was about 5 or 6 years old, Rory. So that is years ago.
About 3 weeks.
Yes. And so we haven't seen each other for 45 years plus. And I just asked him how he was doing, and he said, the world has become all so inclusive now, how hasn't it? And I think he was just referring to the changes from how it was when we were kids and growing up, and it has, and the messages have changed. That is acceptable has changed. I think that we've become more refined, more understanding, more open and accepting, and specifically as counsellors, we need to be able to take our own blockages, find them, identify them, find out what they are, and work on them so that we can be there. We can be fully accepting of another human being. I loved how you started this, Rory. You spoke about the human condition. The people that sit opposite us they share one thing. They are human beings. They share the emotions, their laughter, cry, pain. Their pain is equal to our pain, and it is on that level that we can always relate. People come to counselling because there is something that is weighing them down. There is something that they want to share. There is something that they want to look at and work on, and we're there to work on that with them. So there is the commonality. It is that human condition. It bonds every single one of us. It really does. However, we also need to understand that there are differences, and differences are to be celebrated, and they are to be recognized, and they are to be understood. And you're 100% right, Rory. Learn, study yourself, and study others, and study as much as you can. A great place is counsellingtutor.com. That's our website. It's free. You go into counsellingtutor.com. There's a little search bar. Pop equality and diversity in there, or just diversity into the little search box, and lots will come back. We've got a lot of articles, downloads and podcasts on it, so you can soak yourself in that. If you're a member of the Counselling Study resource, then we have even more. In fact, we've got a whole section devoted to equality and diversity in the Counselling Study resource.
We have, and I think it's been a really interesting real evidence, a really what am I saying? A really exciting podcast.
It is
full of evidence-based matters. He says, trying to cover up his fault. And we started off with developing your modality. The real importance, of course, of making sure that you get a craft in your work and make sure you're competent in it. I've talked about free speech in the therapy room with that super duper handout. And then we finish with working with diverse clients. It's a great little podcast. I hope you enjoy it. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.